Today, I'm so pleased and excited to have the chance to introduce our keynote speaker, Katie Delahaye Payne. Okay? She's the publisher and also CEO. Katie? Okay. Katie's, our keynote speaker is right here. Okay. She is the publisher and also CEO of Payne Publishing. She has been a pioneer in the field of measurement for more than 2 decades. She has founded 2 measurement companies and published a number of books. And her book, some of books are here, so you can check later. Her book, let me see. She has founded 2 measurement companies and published a number of books, and her books, Measure What Matter, Measuring Public Relations, are considered must-read for anyone tasked with measuring public relations and social media. More recently, Katie was named one of the 25 women who rock social media by Leoden's prestige online marketing blog. In 2008, she was also named one of the PR Week's power player for her advocacy of PR measurement. Today, Katie will share her expertise in social media measurement. Her topic today is Theory Meets Reality, Implementing PR and Social Media Measurement Standard. It is a great honor to have her with us this morning. Please join me in welcoming Katie Delahaye Payne.
Thank you. So actually, while we're fussing with that, I need to get a sense of who's in the room a little bit. How many people here are professors of some sort? About half. Practitioners of PR? And students? Yeah, about some. I'm not going to do the math, okay? Let me just get this up here. There we go. Do we see that? So the title of the speech is, thank you, I forgot the second part of it. Title of the speech is When Theory Meets Reality. First of all, how many people here have heard about the Barcelona Principles of Standards? And any of the social media standards, social media conclave, or the standards for social media? We're doing a terrible job of getting the word out. But it's an all-volunteer crowd, so it's a little tough. But anyway, I'll tell you a little bit about that. Basically on your table is a little bit of information about what we do. This presentation, I am very guilty of packing too many things in a slide. So anybody can get the slides afterwards and study them at your leisure. I'm going to go very quickly through the slides because I figure that, you know, if you're here, you want to remember stuff, and then you don't want to forget it when you get home. So that's how come it is. So the classic example of how measurement and social media have collided. I mean, if you think about it for years and years and years, everything in marketing was always attributed to advertising, to stuff you paid for. And PR and, is this working now? I can move around? Yes? I can move around? Yes? No? Yes? Oh, good. Anyway, everything that was done was paid for, and advertising got all the credit for. And for years, public relations people have been jumping up and going, what about this and what about that? So that all sort of fell away when digital and social came along, and you could actually start tracking this stuff thanks to Google Analytics and certain other things.
I do need you to stay at the podium so we can hear you on the video.
Oh, okay. Okay. Anyway, so the example of this is, and the word for this is attribution, right? Who gets credit for the sale or the lead or the end? And there's a lot of people in marketing and advertising that still think they can do this, but it really doesn't work anymore. And I'll give you this example. I'm a huge fan of NPR and New Hampshire Public Radio in particular. And I have it on all the time. And I was listening one morning, and there was an interview with Pat Benatar. And I thought to myself, gosh, I remember Pat Benatar. I really liked your music. And I thought, gosh, I like that song. I'm going to download the whole best of Pat Benatar CD. And so I go on to the WBUR, the Boston station, because they have a link to Amazon that gives them credit, and Amazon, and gives them a little cash. So I buy it from the Be Your Link site off of Amazon Music. I then download it to my iPad and my iPhone and go for a run. And I'm a big runner, and I'm not competitive, but I am competitive with myself because I use Map My Run to figure out how fast I go every morning. And obviously, I like to go a little bit faster. So when I had downloaded this CD onto my iPhone that morning, I was running maybe 13 and a half, 14-minute miles. So I get done, I put her on, I'm listening to Pat Benatar, I'm having a great morning. I'm down to about 11. That's a big difference for me. So I do that for about a week, and I get on the scales, and oh my God, I'm like 3 pounds lighter. Wow, this is really cool. Thank you, New Hampshire Public Radio. So I make a donation to New Hampshire Public Radio. Now, nobody, other than the fact that I did actually tell them this story, they would never have known. You can't track this stuff that way. And so this whole notion of how much revenue is my tweet going to get is just ridiculous. So we sort of have to wash that whole concept out and realize, unfortunately, some people are actually realizing that this doesn't work. While investments are going up in social media, most people do expect to increase their spend. And I just came from a practitioner conference in New York, and the amount of money that is being spent in the investment in social is just enormous. But it's expected to grow by 16% by 2018, but nobody knows what the return is. And the very interesting thing is this is a survey of senior chief marketing officers, and basically they go, all of these vanity metrics don't matter at all. I don't understand what this is doing for my business. I did a survey in preparation for a workshop I was doing, and one of the most interesting comments that came back was from a very senior level person. Why is it that everything in social media is always perfect and always goes up? I don't believe anything they say anymore. And I think that's the result of these vanity metrics. And so what is really starting to happen is that people are integrating net promoter scores, survey research, higher levels of engagement and relationship building into their metrics. And that's what I'm going to kind of talk about. The goal being a new attribution model. A model somehow in your organizations that includes your efforts, the media relations, the social media, and all of that stuff has to somehow be incorporated. And I'm going to talk about a few case studies of where it actually is being incorporated. First, let's talk about the standards. And this is a very short form. If you go to smmstandards.com, you can get all the details. But essentially what happened was that after 40 years of sitting around saying we need standards for public relations, a whole bunch of people from various assorted agencies, PRSA, IPR, AMEC, Global Alliance, blah, 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 all these people got together and issued a set of principles for PR measurement called the Barcelona Principles, happened to be in Barcelona. And they said it's important to set goals. It's important to measure outcomes, not just outputs. The effective business of PR and business results can and should be measured. It requires quantity and quality. Earned media value and ad value equivalency are not the measure of public relations. Social media can and should be measured. Transparency and replicability are paramount. And the results to that, the response to that was kind of like, I don't know what you think about those, but I'm like, duh. This is like somebody telling me not to kill puppies on Mother's Day. This is not a revolutionary manifesto here. This is fairly simple. But people responded to the killing off of ad value equivalency with shock and awe and horror, jumped up and down and got all kinds of things going. And it did get a lot of publicity. I couldn't have cared less because I've been trying to kill off AVEs for years. What I cared about was that number 6, social media can and should be measured. I'm like, duh, I'd already been measuring it for 6 years. But what happened was the right after that, all the PR people said, we need standards for social media measurement. And I'm like, you're not going to set them because they are already being set by the Digital Analytics Association, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, the Bureau Media Ratings Council, and a whole bunch of other people in the digital space who were way ahead of PR. And I said, we do not need multiple different sets of standards. You're all going to come to my living room, and I'm not going to let you out until we come up with a set of standards. So that was in 2011. We actually published in 2013 agreed upon standard definitions and best practices for how to source content, how to define reach and impressions, how to define engagement, how to define influence, opinion and advocacy sentiment, and impact and value. And those are all at smmstandards.com. I think it's also on smmstandards.org. They're detailed, and I'm going to go through a couple of them. But so all starts out with the core issue, which I'm going to touch on a lot, is the validity of the data. Because what's happening is that people are buying all these tools, and none of the tools and none of the data and none of the metrics match. And so your ad agency is giving you one set of data, your social media agency is giving you some other set of data, your PR agency is giving something else. None of it matches, none of it makes sense, and none of it is integrated. So the first thing we said was, you've got to start out with what we call the transparency table. I mean, if you think about it, what we would like would be that thing on the side of your cereal box that said, this is what's in it. Well, that's the equivalent, this is the equivalent of that. It is a questionnaire that you give to all the vendors out there, or any project you start, that says, where are you getting the data? How is, does it include different foreign languages? Is it English only? What countries is it in? What competitors are you looking at? How do you do tonality? How do you do sentiment? Is it human? Is it automated? A lot of very basic questions, but that's where you've got to start, because otherwise the data that you collect is going to be completely unusable. When we got around to talking about standards for reach and impressions, the first thing we said was basically, there is no standard. Because what happens is the fact that we have no control over ComScore and Nielsen and people like that. Their numbers are completely off. And then we really got into the conversation about, do impressions matter anyway? Reach being reach into the audience, which you really don't know about in social media. It's very hard to figure out exactly who you're reaching, because even the geography piece is messed up. I don't know, anybody here old enough to remember the Iranian Revolution? We all changed our geographies to Tehran to confuse the Iranian authorities. For 3 years, Twitter thought I was from Tehran. The other big mistake is that and I'll go through this in a second, but the notion that reaching lots of eyeballs gets your goal has been completely disproved by all the crises out there. There's lots of engagement around, back in the days, Susan Komen, and last week it was Starbucks, and the week before that it was SeaWorld. There's lots of engagement, lots of impressions, perhaps not the kind you would like. So basically what we did was we worked with the Digital Analytics Association. We used their standards, and we have now incorporated some of the metrics from the Advertising Research Foundation. But the point is, if you can get away from using impressions in social media, do so, because it is completely unreliable data. And whatever you do, do not use multipliers. Here's the thing. Procter & Gamble and AT&T did 40 years worth of research that said, if you reach this many eyeballs with certain messages, desirable visuals, and recommendations, people will buy the product. Nobody's done that research. Nobody's got that data that says for all consumer packaged goods, this many impressions means this many bottles of shampoo. So what we're all doing now is sort of coming around and saying, well, okay, so for digital it's hits, which in my mind means how idiots track success. Now it's like, oh, well, if you count the number of followers, et cetera, and it's okay, you can do that, but really it all comes down to all of those impressions are nothing more than sperm. There's lots of them, and most of them don't do anything. So the question is, how do you isolate the one that's actually going to produce the result you want? And I would argue that you're going to have to do that with a little more statistical analysis than just counting the number of followers. For engagement, we had a long discussion about, what's good engagement, what's low-level engagement, what's high-level engagement. It's basically anything more than nothing. If you think about an impression is something that may or may not somebody has seen, engagement is a physical sign of life of some sort, assuming it's not a bot. But in reality, high level, low level is all going to be dependent upon your goals. Any measure of engagement must be tied to the goals and objectives of your program, period. That's all you need to know from that one. The point is the fact that if impressions are like sperm, or in terms of engagement, like guys whistling at women from a construction site because there's no relationship there and there never will be one, and likes and follows, yeah, that's great. You've got some physical sign of life, but you don't know whether, it's like if you sort of take the relationship metaphor a little bit farther, likes and follows are the corporate equivalent of Match.com. Somebody's winking at you, but you don't know whether that person is your weird cousin Ralph that lives in the basement with a snake and his parents, do you really want to have a relationship with this person? You have no idea. All you know is they liked you. On Twitter, at least, you can sort of take the time to think about it a little bit more. It's a little bit harder, but basically, you don't know who they are, and you don't know whether they're going to do your business any good. So it really does come down to defining an action, a call to action that somebody takes that's going to further your business. And maybe it's trial, maybe it's actually buying the product. But the point of all of this is that it is not a one-way conversation. It is a two-way conversation. And what you hope in social is you hope that it expands the network that you are in. So it's not like, I love you, I marry you, I'm walking down the aisle. What you really want is you want the whole family and all the friends and all the networks to love you as much as your spouse does, right? And it's not easy. How many people here think that, everything gets easier after you walk down the aisle, right? You gotta work at it. Don't put all of your efforts in getting likes, put all of your efforts into getting advocates. That's what you should be doing with your time. So, good example of this, UNICEF jumps into social media, says, Katie, come in and help us define our metrics and our benchmarks, and I say, great. And I don't know if you follow UNICEF on Facebook, but they have a gallery of the most gorgeous, heartbreaking stories, and I spend quite a lot of time looking at all of these things, determined that, and absolutely convinced that beautiful pictures of starving baby girls was going to be more effective at driving engagement than starving baby boys. Okay, I'm a feminist, what can I say? It had absolutely no impact. There was no difference. None of it made any difference, frankly. What they did with all of those expensive videos, I don't know. But essentially, the first thing we found out was that they get they get a fairly high level of engagement anyway. They have a lot of celebrities. Serena Williams has a birthday, happy birthday, Serena Williams, blah, blah, blah. There's tons and tons and tons of that. I go back to UNICEF. I said, how does that help your mission? It doesn't. Don't count it. So essentially what we did do for them was to define high quality engagement and low quality engagement. Low quality engagement was happy birthday, Serena Williams, or I love David Beckham. Lots of people love David Beckham. High quality engagement was getting across UNICEF's messages. So instead of, oh my God, did you see that picture of that starving baby? I'm going to go to Africa and adopt it. Quality engagement is, please don't. That's not going to help. Trust UNICEF. Ask UNICEF what you can do to help because they are the experts in child welfare, right? So we end up with this chart of engagement. And the first thing we notice is that, gosh, David Beckham is really great at, getting engagement around UNICEF, except for the fact that mostly it's football fans, but that's okay. David Beckham likes UNICEF. That's not a terrible message. Certainly gets the word out there. But much more interesting was Mia Farrow, who only had 40,000 followers. Her followers were the ones who were saying, support UNICEF, they're the experts. So the real high quality stuff was coming out in the Mia Farrow events. And notice that there is no lift for beautiful pictures anywhere else. It's basically all around the celebrities and social. And so what they knew was, if we have a complicated story to get across, we're going to use Mia Farrow's type celebrity. If we have a brand new thing that we just want to get some word out there, we can tattoo it on David Beckham's chest, and the rest will be history. So then the next thing, so that was the engagement piece. Then we tackled influence. And the first thing that we all agreed upon was clout is not influence. Clout scores and things like that, computer-generated things like that, are not influence. What they are is perhaps an indicator of potential virality. They really are just an activity metric. What we did conclude was that if something is influential, it changes, you are persuaded to change your behavior or opinion in a way that you would not otherwise have done, right? Reach, engagement, relevance, and frequency are required. So somebody is not influential if they just write about you once. I don't care how many followers they have. Doesn't matter if they're only writing about your topic once. And if they have no followers, they don't matter. If there's no engagement around that particular individual, that individual is just pushing stuff out there and nobody's responding, probably not very influential either. So to be influential, somebody has to have reach, engagement, relevance, and frequency, or they do not count in terms of the standards. Then we got into the whole sentiment area, and basically the conclusion was sentiment was way overrated. I'll give you a great example, which is we were working at the time for Stanford, and did a comparison between Stanford, MIT, and Caltech, and somebody else. Anyway, in terms of sentiment, and the top level sentiment was, I fell in love at Stanford, right? That was love. You look at the indications of love, and it was all about I fell in love at Stanford. Well, that doesn't work. So it takes a lot of refinement to get sentiment to a place, and it doesn't. Nobody says that I love my linear accelerator. I mean, they're talking about very different things. So if you're in the B2B world, or you're talking about a utility company, I was talking to the Con Edison folks yesterday, and they're like, we just like it when people don't hate us. Their definition of success is neutral sentiment and social. So that's the first thing, totally overrated. Secondly, it is the area of the most errors that you can possibly find. And I use this chart at you're my left, you're right, to illustrate this. I was doing a vendor test for a client, and just out of curiosity, I said, well, let's just look at coverage of this company for 1 month period in March, so same time, roughly the same content. I mean, they were all basically searching the same, using the same sources of content. And as you can see, 4 different vendors. One said that the coverage was 11% positive, one said it was 7% positive, one said it was 58% positive. Okay? So the first thing we learned there is somebody's wrong. You have no idea who. We actually did human coding against those particular people to find out that actually the one that with the 7% was the most accurate. And the other thing that you learn is that there's no consistency in how any of this stuff is done. So if you use 2 different vendors, you cannot compare the results. You have got to have consistency. And frankly, consistency is better than perfection. With that second vendor, NetBase, was the one that the client selected. I don't think they're perfect at all, but they are now a single source of truth, so that everything that company does is looked at with the exact same NLP system, so we know that the differences are due to different tactics or different results, not different people or different algorithms. So you've got to validity test things before you do anything. And then finally, the big controversial, what's the ROI? ROI can be cost savings. It can be, and I'll talk about these, lower legal costs, greater efficiency, faster time to implementation, faster sales cycle. lower cost per impact, cost per message. It is not impressions. It is not AVEs. There is no add value equivalency for Twitter or social or any of those things. Nor is it the number of likes or views or shares. That's not ROI. ROI is an accounting term. Talk to your people in the business school and they'll make sure that you understand that. I got so angry at this whole discussion that I started writing down all the academic research and all the examples that I've seen of ROI for social and traditional media, and eventually ended up with 50 shades of PR ROI. And if you want a free download, you can go to my website. That's what's on your table. There's a little code that gives you the hashtag and the code, and if you do that, you can get it for free. That's my ad. So what are the biggest challenges that we've encountered in trying to implement these standards? And I will tell you, I've done this for about 15 companies now. The picture on the picture of all those reports, that was my client who started out with 34 different measurement reports that she gathered from around her company. Her company at this point was a relatively new spin-off in the pharma world. And she just said, look, I know we need a single source of truth, and I know we want this dashboard, but let's at least find out what people are doing. 34 different reports, no consistency, total cost $950,000, and nobody was using the data. So the dashboard we created took a long time, and I'll mention a few of the history things. The first problem was finding the valid and relevant data. Getting everybody to agree on, okay, it's a competitive study. What competitors are we using? Okay, we're using, let's go through the vendor test. Then let's go, what is valid data? And when do you use social? And when do you not use social? And when do you incorporate social? Getting consensus takes a long time, but it's the most important thing. Once you have consensus around what success looks like, what business impact it is, and I'll give you some examples in a minute, the metrics are easy. It's getting agreement on what is success is the hardest piece. Then climbing up and around all those silos and all the organizations is a bear. I'm still going through programs that were supposed to end 6 months ago. I'm still waiting to get, we can't give you the Google Analytics data. Oh, yes, we can. No, we can't. Who's got it? I don't know. So tracking down data, everybody says, oh, yes, we do this, we do that. Well, nobody actually has it. So what we ended up doing was taking the standards documents and making them fit the language of these organizations. Every organization has different goals and different metrics anyway, right? If you just talk to their CEOs and their leadership team, they will all have different metrics. Academics are a little bit different. In the academic institutions, you find a lot more consistency around discount rates and completion rates and things like that. But for the most part in industry, there's a whole different language that everybody uses. So what we did was we actually created custom standards that were very strictly based on the standards, but we changed all the language to make it look like the company. One of the things that was very interesting was they wanted a social media engagement score, which we developed. I think I've got an example of that's next. But essentially, this is what we ended up with. We couldn't get anybody to agree on the various levels of engagement. So we just said, okay, we just want to count follower growth. Fine. At least that way, if we all agreed that what mattered was to increase followers, we could sit here and do a chart that said which tweets actually generated the highest follower growth. Not terribly sophisticated, but got them all on the same page and all focused on that's what was the most important thing. This is where we started out with the social media engagement, which I was rather fond of, but it was just too confusing for them. The idea that we would rate likes and follows and plus ones is a 0.5 and sharing content was a 2 and contains a quote and shares a link and all those other things. Nice idea. Nobody's ever done it. It's just too complicated. So that's a lesson learned. Other lesson learned was you're not going to be able to find all the data. You're going to have all of these different challenges out there. Just put it all on a dashboard. There are going to be gaps. You circle those gaps and you say, data not available. Why? I don't know. Go ask Ralph over there who's been, holding back on this data. Make the gaps obvious, because senior leadership wants a single set of truth and wants a dashboard. You've got to make the point to them. It's going to take a lot of bulletproof vests to do this. I promise you, it's not easy. Produce a report, make the rounds, get your feedback. And then the most important thing that's supposed to come out of all these things is the so what and the now what, right? We did all these things. This is what happened. What do we draw from it? And I'm going to kind of skip over a couple of these things because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. And I'm not going to go through all of these 6 steps because you can read the book, you can read a billion things that I've written that basically go through the 6 steps, but there's a couple of lessons in these 6 steps. One is that you can, whatever you want to measure, whether you want to measure an event or a Twitter campaign or whatever, you got to go through these 6 steps. The second to last and the arguably least important of these steps is step 5, worrying about the tools. Do not worry about the tools until you have defined and answered all those other things, because you will waste a lot of money. You do not want to be the client, very lovely nonprofit client in Canada, who spent a whole day with me defining their metrics. At the end of the day, they said, okay, the 2 things that are the most important to the success of our business, our nonprofit organization, employee engagement and growing the volunteer base. And I said, great, that's easy. We know how to measure that. We have the volunteer base. We can track that. We know how to, their terms, their standard ways of defining employee engagement. Easy. Yes. I said, well, we just signed a contract for $85,000 for XYZ vendor to measure our results. Will that platform do this? And I said, nope. Nope, just wasted $85,000 and you're stuck with something for a year that you're not going to be able to use to measure your results. So do not worry about tools until you've worried about all the rest of this. People have a hard time sometimes defining what success means to them. Get them in a room together. Get everybody who's the decision maker, everybody's going to use your reports, all of that stuff, put them in a room together and say, okay, shut your eyes, imagine that your boss's boss comes into your desk, plunks down a case of champagne on your desk and says, congratulations, you've really kicked butt this year. Here's a case of champagne, take an extra week off. What is different in the organization that would have prompted that response? What that does is it defines what senior leadership expects you to do with social media. And 90% of the time, they don't know. So your problem is you've got to get them in a room together and get them to agree on how what you do contributes to the bottom line or the mission or the goals, right? Are you really trying to get awareness and education and understanding, or are you trying to get revenue and leads and other things, right? Get them to define that. Interestingly enough, I worked with a media company, and it was all about, we have to get increased engagement. We have to increase engagement. And I said, well, okay, why? And they said, well, because we get paid by video starts. We don't care whether anybody watches the whole video, but the moment people start watching the video, we get paid. Like, okay, that's very simple. What increases video starts? And then it was ratings and market share. And we figured out that we defined a high engagement scale that correlated very closely to video starts, right? Very simple after that. So essentially the process for defining these things is to, have some kind of a workshop meeting to get everybody on the same page. You start off with something that says, okay, either I want to do social to increase my media coverage, or vice versa. Somehow, this is actually an example I'm going to talk about in a minute, but I want to, increase the intent to visit. This is Atlantic City, New Jersey. So we want to increase the intent to visit. We want to change the reputation. Ultimately, what they cared about was non-gaming revenue and non-gaming visits. Fine. Once we knew that, then we can tie everything back to visits. And we worked through and said, okay, what's a proxy? Since I can't count every head that walks into the gates of Atlantic City, what's a proxy? Downloading the visitor guide. Fine. We can use downloads of the visitor guide, correlate that to various forms of engagement, various forms of media coverage. End of story, done. Those are the easy ones. It's going to be complicated. I mentioned this. These are the questions that you really need to answer. You need to be clear about what you're measuring, because that's going to depend upon who's got the data, right? If you're measuring paid, chances are it's going to live in digital and advertising. Your own stuff, you should have that data, whether you're using a social analytic platform or Twitter Analytics or Facebook Insights. And then there's earned, and that's a different category, and you're going to have to do some form of listening to get that, probably in the PR department. When you start putting all these things together, you're probably going to need 2 or 3 different measurement forms. You're going to need maybe surveys to figure out whether, in fact, people really are more aware. You're definitely going to need Google Analytics and social insights, and then you're going to probably need some level of content analysis to understand the quality, whether what people are saying about you is the quality, is the nature of the conversation desirable or undesirable. And there's I want to get to the examples here because so here's the classic example. This is my favorite social media story of all times. And it teaches you several things. One is ask so what 3 times. So we were doing an analysis of social media for the USO. And USO has how many people here know what the USO is, given this crowd? Well, that's not bad. What's the first thing you think of when I say USO? Guess what? He's dead, and so are most of their contributors. Big problem. They need to extend their audience, and guess who who are their customers? Their true stakeholders, actively serving members of the military, men and women and their families, most of whom are under 35. So they hire this woman, M. Hall, who starts a social media campaign for them. And so the first thing we notice is the nature of the conversation about USO is changing. It used to be things like, I'll meet you in front of the USO counter at the airport. Doesn't do much for their image. M started doing USO Fridays. She engaged there's a lot of alumni military clubs out there. She engaged them. She just built up a following on Facebook. And all of a sudden those gray bars in there are things like, I love the USO. Not where you are in an airport. They're like, God, I love what the USO is doing. USO just did this for me. So it's much higher level of engagement and appreciation of the USO. So everybody's, congratulations, happiness, engagement, great. Senior leadership is still very skeptical and says, so what? Who cares? We said, okay, what matters? What matters? Matters is donations. So now let's look at what happened over the course of the year with impressions, which they were still counting, and engagement, and revenue. And the red line is revenue, blue line is impressions. So the first thing we noticed was when they had an event with Obama wrapping care packages for the USO on the White House lawn, donations spiked. $65,000 an hour came in, and they broke the USO servers. Wow, fabulous. Got on the morning talk shows. It was fabulous. So guess who gets the credit? The people who got the story on the morning talk shows. God, must be getting the people on the morning talk shows. That's going to be the source of revenue. So they do something with Matt Lauer and in June. And as you can see, that second little blip, little teeny tiny blip compared to the big blip? That little tiny blip, that was the Matt Lauer segment. Not nearly as successful, got some impressions, but didn't really get a whole lot of spectacular amounts of revenue. So clearly it wasn't just getting on the talk shows. Then they take the whole cast and crew of Stephen Colbert to Baghdad. High risk, very successful. They also happen to have every living president say, support the USO and donate here on television. And there's a lot of Twitter stuff going on and whatever. And so obviously they got huge amounts of awareness and huge amounts of engagement, huge amount of impressions, as well as large donations. So what? What do you take from this? Where's the question that is still hanging out there, which is why? Yeah, you get all the impressions and you get all the donations when you do something spectacular and very, very, very expensive with Stephen Colbert in Baghdad. But it didn't cost anything to do the thing with Obama on the White House lawn. Why did that do so well? Well, if you go back to when did M. Hall start the social campaign, exact same time frame. Now, we could correlate the Facebook activities with increased engagement. We couldn't actually, we didn't have the data to correlate it to the revenue. But the only difference in all those three things was M. Hall's engagement with this community. And what she had done was tapped into, because she was a supporter of Obama, so she was tapped into the entire Obama network on Facebook. She tapped into that and said, if you want to support the president, he's out of the White House lawn, show up. If you can't be there, donate here. And adding the donate button to Facebook was really the difference. So that is social media ROI. This is what we did for Atlantic City, which is I love this because it's sort of like the chart that everybody wants to be able to show. We developed for Atlantic City an optimal content score, and what that is just it's a customized engagement index, or in this case a quality index. So if something contains a desirable, what drives people back to Atlantic City, New Jersey, or back to Atlantic City, New Jersey, is desirable visuals, dispelling a myth, food, shopping, more than just gaming, and recommendations. So we developed this score, and we apply it to social media, we apply it to traditional media, we apply it to everything. And we track it over time. And what we found was there's a very high correlation between stuff that contains those things and traffic to that website. And so what we're able to do is that got us the credibility for the score. We were then able to say, okay, if you took all of the social and PR activities away that the Atlantic City Alliance does, all the events, all the stuff that they do, if you took it away, your score would be that much lower. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that fewer people would be there, but it's like things would be 20% worse if you took it away. And we also were able to show that people who had seen earned media out there were more likely to consider Atlantic City as a place to go. And I will tell you that the reason why the ACA is still operational in Atlantic City, despite all of the cutbacks and everything else, is because of this data. So measurement can be very, very good for you. And then ultimately, this is the, go back up before I get to that. This is the most popular chart I've ever created. And this is something that if you do nothing else, create this chart with your data. And the way you do this is you basically take everything that you've done, every campaign, I don't care whether it's a hashtag, campaign, whatever, rank it on a scale of, if you've done 20 things, 1 to 20. If you've done 10 things in the quarter, 1 to 10. Rank them based on your quality score, whatever that key metric is, that, what as I said, the kick butt index, you've really been kicking butt, or damn it, we're getting our butts kicked. Whatever that means, rank them all on that score. And that's your vertical axis. Your horizontal axis is the resources, right? So if we go back to the USO story, the Colbert thing would be up in that upper right-hand corner, because it was very, very high resources. It got a lot of, it got a lot of donations, but it was very, very high resources. The Obama on the front lawn is over there on the other side in the green, where low resources, very, very high success rate. And then if you want to add a third component to this, you can use the volume of exposure, whatever you want to call it, either the volume of tweets, the volume of follows, the volume of whatever it is. You can put a volume factor in there to see how large. But the point is that you can, show this chart to management and make a decision going forward to stop doing stupid things, right? I would argue that the stuff that ends up in the bottom right-hand corner there are stupid things that either need to be stopped or changed or fixed or something. And so it helps you continuously improve your program, not justify your existence. And I would beg you all, please do not use measurement to just justify your existence, because you will lose your credibility and people won't believe you. So every time you do measurement, you should be using it to improve your program. So the next question, people, I don't mean to answer everybody's questions, but I will answer a few that I know you're going to ask, which is, how do I afford all this stuff? Guess what? Don't call it measurement, call it research. Everybody has money for research, nobody has money for measurement, because somewhere in that CFO's brain is, why should I pay you to justify your existence? This does not make sense. Measurement to them means justifying your existence. You are doing research, especially with social, you are doing customer research to find out what's happening out there about your brand or your product. So it is research. Secondly, if you're working with agencies, if there's different departments doing different things, get everybody in a room together and get one platform. I don't care what it is. I'm happy to recommend different platforms for different things. I don't care what it is, but use one platform. Do not, sign up. I can't tell you how many organizations I've gone up, well, we've got a free Sprout Social account, and we've got a free this account and that account, and none of the data is going to be the same, and you're just adding to the confusion. So get everybody in a room, everybody chips in a little bit of money, and you can get a pretty decent social media listening platform. If you're working in a large enough organization, just put it out there. Hey, what tools are being used? I went into one organization, 26 different tools being used. You really do not need 26 different tools. But put it out there to the whole organization, find out if anybody else is using them, and either you can expand that account or at least find out what that stuff looks like. The biggest problem is a lot of these 1-week trials or 2-week trials don't tell you enough. Spread the cost over 2 fiscal years. Reach out to universities. I was astounded at the IPRC how many universities now have social listening accounts, and they can do some work for you, some research for you to answer some of these questions. Monitor only what matters. Do not matter. It does. Who was it that I was talking to? An American nonprofit. USO is not a bad example, but an American nonprofit does not need a listening tool that listens to the world. Yes, they need to listen in Spanish, but honest to God, if you're not targeting a program towards Hispanic Americans, that's not a requirement for your program. That will cut down the cost and the volume and just the amount of stuff and complexity. So focus in on what really matters. If you are, this is an example that we learned the hard way, if you are targeting seniors, you do not necessarily need to be on Instagram or Twitter. Yes, you need to be on Facebook, but you don't need every single platform for every single audience. Narrow your list to what you can afford. Well, here's the one that I want the most, which is, where did it go? The one thing that, take advantage of free stuff. Everybody does these free trials. And everybody goes, oh, I want to try this. Let me sign up right now. No. Generally, free trials are 30 days. If you have, let's just take, for example, you have a major event starting May 1st. You sign up on April 27th, so you have a little bit of understanding before the launch, and then you have 27 days of data coming in to measure your launch, right? Think about these things when you're signing up. Don't just arbitrarily sign up. Sign up in a way that you can use that free data, deliver a report that says, see, this is what we could show you if we had this thing, and then you can get funding for it. You'll have something to show. You'll have a demo project that you can show. And obviously use Google Analytics and Facebook Insights and Twitter Analytics and all those things that are free anyway. And then think carefully about whether you really do need to go beyond that. I mean, I love Unmetric and all these other fancy schmancy programs, but for, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, very few people need them. I mean, I signed up for Hootsuite Pro for about a month and a half and went, I'm not using this stuff. I mean, it's nice to have, but you don't need it for your business. So be real careful about signing up for stuff that costs. It may not be necessary. So with that, it's not about the media. It's about the business and the customers and the goals of your organization, right? It's not about how much data you collect. It's what you do with it. Again, make decisions with it. This comes from Beth Cantor's in my book about measuring the network nonprofit. I've always said, you got to be data-driven. No. The reality is the fact that you are smart people and you know your businesses and you know your programs and your passions. And if something doesn't make sense, be data-informed about it, not data-driven. If something doesn't make sense or you really feel in your gut instinct that this data isn't right, there's probably some reason for that. So don't just make arbitrary decisions based on data. Use it to inform those decisions and put things into context. It's not how loud you're shouting. Stop counting impressions. It's about the relationships that you are building. And don't use lack of standards as an excuse anymore, because I've just explained them to you. So with that, we'll start taking some questions. That's how to get hold of me. Yes? Well.
Quick question, easy question for you, and thank you for everything, first of all. Monitoring and measuring.
Yes.
Generically speaking, whether they're free, these analytic tools. What if, just a simple generic concept of, what if we have some tools, some of the majors, and they're all, this one says, oh, you're doing 10 good, and this one says you're doing 100 good, and this one says you're doing 1,000 good. So how do you, they seem unequal other than the fact that they're all saying you're doing well. He switched, his English words. And then, and then next month or whatever, it's 12 and 110 and 2,000. So then, when you show your investors or your bosses or your clients, you're purporting to and ostensibly doing better, and then better, right? So each month the numbers go up. Doesn't matter what these numbers mean, as opposed, in relation to eyeballs.
Yes.
Or impressions.
Well, you've got to define good first.
Okay, but a positive number, for example, like, oh, you're doing like in the
Yeah.
black instead of in the red, number-wise.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and the
Into the
numbers are
black.
increasing, incrementing, and then is that not a good sort of like generic, basic, sort of
Because they
measure?
don't. I mean, in reality, having done this for 28 years, they go up and down. And it's not hard to put a circle around something and say, this is when Ray Rice got video in an elevator, and that's why the numbers went down that month. And that's why, and what you start to learn is, You identify the people who you put in social media, whose voices are in social media that are more effective at getting good, whether that's engagement or whatever it happens to be. Yes, the big picture is, yes, everybody wants you to go up and to the right, but there are times when it doesn't. I mean, look at the Atlantic City case. They were doing great, right? We had a whole year of up and to the right, and everybody was thrilled to death, and then things started happening. Well, in fact, the reason why Atlantic City Alliance was created was because they knew they knew casinos were going to close. They knew that the chatter was going to be bad. And so they were able to look at the data, see it start to go down, say, what can we do to make it go back up again? Oh, let's do free fireworks and Lady Antebellum and Blake Shelton on the beach. And it went back up again. So you use it to not just say, I'm up and to the right, because it's not going to be that way.
Great, thank you.
And that's it. You look at things, if everything just goes up and to the right, because you're looking at it quarterly, look at it monthly. And if it's still up and to the right, look at it weekly. And if it's still going that way, look at it daily, because you'll be able to figure out, the increased granularity will tell you what's making things go up and down. Yes?
Hi, I guess I'm a bit short for this mic, too. The answer to this might be in one of your books, thank you. But I was wondering, when you had the Obama versus the Colbert chart up, was there any more of a breaking down available in terms of whether one did more than the other to reach out specifically to people who had no idea who the USO was?
Well, there's a very interesting piece of that. Thank you for asking, because it's a great question. USO did an annual reputation survey. To what extent are you familiar with the USO? To what extent do you know what they do? Blah, blah, blah. Standard, whatever. And in the year after the Colbert thing, when they had tripled the number of impressions and had a, just a blowout year of fabulousness, among the general public, awareness went down, not a statistically significant amount, but like 0.02. So it didn't move. And I was at the IPRC conference with this data and the client, and I'm going, we screwed up. We asked the wrong questions. The data's wrong. There's got to be something in there, blah, blah, blah. And it turns out that we dug into the data, and we had actually segmented we'd asked a question in the survey to ask them whether they had any familiarity or any connection with the military. And we had segmented the media coverage by high concentration military family DMOs, right? So we knew we had gotten information as to where were the highest concentrated military, matched that up to the media. So we had that data as well. And it turns out that among people who had some knowledge of the USO and some connection to the military, awareness and understanding the mission was up 22%. So the point there is their audience is not the general public. They thought it was, it's not. It's never going to be. If you don't have any connection to the military, you're never going to have any connection to the USO, other than passing them at the airport. And who cares? For them, it's a non-engaged audience that they can, they can't afford to be everywhere, so it's basically that whole national push doesn't do them any good.
Well, and if I could ask a follow-up. Yeah. I remember hearing about the Colbert thing, but I don't know personally. Was that just a stunt, or did that also double as entertaining the troops overseas, which is what they're really, one of the things they're supposed to do?
I think it was a whole bunch of, it was a fascinating process, because Colbert wanted to do it. And I believe Colbert approached the USO. It wasn't the other way around. I think Colbert wanted to do it. And in fact, I'm sure they were the driving force. They wanted, the thing that, the other point, and this is again, when you're looking at different, you know, the cost benefit of those different things, they were supposed, Colbert and his producer, who happens to be a friend of mine, were supposed to go out to a base outside of Baghdad, and the helicopter that they would have been on crashed. And fortunately, nobody died, but that would have been a major, you know, the risk involved in that was so high. And I posed the question afterwards. I mean, I said, you know, never mind the cost. You know, there's very little, I mean, there's obviously risk to everything, but putting a donate here you know, thing on your Facebook page and, you know, doing an event on the White House lawn is a lot lower risk than a very, very high profile thing like that. And you can't do that all the time, so. Yeah.
I have to leave, so don't take it personally if I'm walking out, because this was great. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
you're welcome. Thank you. I'm so glad you could be here. Other questions? Oh, come on. Somebody must.
Thanks again for coming. So one of the things that struck me about your presentation was that it seems like social media research needs to be more about intentionality and sort of thoughtful approach to your own business. Is that a fair sort of way
Absolutely.
of characterizing it? So then the next part of that question is, are you finding a lot of people, I know you have case studies, but are you finding that a lot of people just simply are not doing that?
Actually, fewer now than a year or so ago. I mean, I think that the CMO research that I showed, I think there is a shift. I think people now automatically react to things like likes and, you know, roll their eyes. Because I think what people are realizing, what the missing link is that social media, I have a slide that I took out, but I probably shouldn't have, is social media is not, it's not media, it's not PR, it's not a communications function, it is the business today. I mean, if you look at most growing successful businesses today, they have incorporated, other than some of the regulated ones, but the really successful businesses have incorporated social media into everything. I mean, if you look at Southwest, the airlines, most airlines now use social for customer service. New Jersey Transit doesn't, but that's a reference to my Twitter stream last night. But, you know, people automatically go to Twitter now to complain or to raise an issue or whatever, and you get instant responses. And the recovery is faster, and therefore people say nicer things about you, and it's not tying up. Comcast was the originator of this. Comcast, you know, you call Comcast, sit on the phone, complain for an hour, not get anything done. I happen to know the guy that started Comcast Cares, so I know that if I have a problem, at Comcast Cares. So I'm sitting there, we just had an outage in New Hampshire, and I sit down and I'm trying to watch television on Friday night, and at Comcast Cares, are there any outages? What's going on out there? I can't turn my television doesn't work. And within less than a minute, no outages that I can find in your region, try unplugging and plugging back in the cable box. Worked fine, 5 minutes later, I'm happy. Now, that's not a communications function, but that is value to the company in terms of money saved, A, because they haven't had to send a guy out the next day to come fix my cable box. So I think companies are realizing the non-communications value of social and measuring that. Absolutely, that's happening. I think the other piece of this that is changing things is the mobile and the ability to track mobile purchases and mobile search. And that's changing it as well, because you know, it's not a communications function, it's a sales function. And I think one of the challenges right now is that social is increasingly being grabbed by sales and marketing departments and taken out of the communications realm.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah.
Hi, I really enjoyed your talk. I want to ask you about, you touched upon social media indexes. And I did some research about that, and I see there is a movement towards developing some social media index that can compare performance across different companies. You said it's not very reliable and so forth, but I know some companies push for developing that.
That's why we started the conclave. I mean, that's why the conclave and the standards are the way they are, is that, I'm hoping it's, there it is. So this index was created based on the goals of the company. It's completely different from the one that we created for Atlantic City, New Jersey. It's completely different from the one I created for the media company. It's completely different from Federal Reserve Bank. They're all different because they all have different weightings of things. Tiffany, I'm working with Tiffany right now, and you know, to them, it's all about the visuals and the credit and the celebrities. That's not even on here. You know, contains a quote from one of our content experts. Nobody's, you know, that. So this is why the conclave said, no, I'm sorry, there are no such thing as standard indexes across companies, because how could you possibly have the same things in an index for the Federal Reserve Bank and Tiffany, you know, and Pfizer and Southwest?
But what about in terms of within a category, let's say we just looked into grocery stores, and just to think about comparing performance across.
Sure.
So,
I mean, sure. I mean, if you have I mean, you could certainly do one for categories within categories, but you can't compare Durham Marketplace to, you know, Kroger, to Safeway. And that's what you get into. But that's like anything else in measurement. You have benchmarks. You have a competitive set or a share of wallet set or whatever you want to call it of peer institutions that you compare yourself to. I mean, when we were working with Georgia Tech, and actually if anybody on the academic side, I've got, it's a little old now, but we did do a fabulous study for Georgia Tech in the early days of social, comparing. Now, here's the interesting comparison. So it was Georgia Tech, University of Georgia, but that was one category. That was not for everything. That was purely for local discussions versus the arch rival. Then we looked at Stanford, MIT, Caltech, University of Michigan, and Carnegie Mellon for the tech part of it, right? For the knowledge piece of it. And who was using which. But, you know, and again, that is a defined set of fairly similar institutions where you could apply an index. But you couldn't do that, you know, for the University of New Hampshire versus Georgia Tech. So, and that's, and part of it that you really, I will tell you, from an are you an academic?
Yes.
Yeah. You're not in the trenches, and I will tell you that the biggest mess up, I'm trying to think of what's the cog in the wheel there, is from the practitioner side. That's not a fair comparison. They have 3 times the staff that we do. I'm like, I don't care whether you think it's fair. If the CEO thinks it's fair, we're doing it that way. But that's the problem, is on the practitioner side, people will look, if they're just so desperate to look good and justify their existence, that they will reject anything that they don't think is exactly the same. So that's part of the thing with all of these standards and indexes that we've really worked very hard, is to say that we're trying to reduce the reasons to say no to them. Right? We want everybody to at least agree into some of these principles, and we don't. And now there are 36 people on the actually there's probably 50 now, but 50 people from Procter & Gamble, General Motors, McDonald's, Southwest Airlines, all of their agencies, you know, many different types of people and academics, all made these things up. I mean, it's not like we didn't make them up, but we all agreed on these things. And that's, to me, is the power to be able to say, you know what? We've looked at this from 37 different angles. And this is the best we can come up with, because we're not going to agree on a standard definition of engagement for, you know, Katie's Cat Shelter and National Wildlife and Raytheon. Yep, one more? Yep.
One more quick question.
Okay, quick question. It's a follow-up to your statement, successful businesses have incorporated social media into their business model.
Yes.
As a practitioner in dealing with senior managers, how do communicators, professional communications, PR department and whatnot, convince senior managers to devote the customer service resources to answer those tweets and Facebook posts that are, you know, complaints, customer complaints?
Do a pilot study, right? And then this is how Comcast got it, right? What they did was they added up the personnel time. And actually, the best example of all was Sodexo. And Sodexo said, you know, I bet if we worked on our relationships on Twitter, we could probably attract better, more qualified people. So they took 3 people for 6 months, put them on Twitter looking for people who were talking about food and were looking for jobs. And in 6 months, they filled all of their openings with far more qualified people and canceled their $350,000 monster ad budget. And so literally the net ROI was $300,000. You don't have to do that very often. Comcast added up the amount of to them it was key, response time and solution time were 2 key metrics. And they just compared, you know, phone calls to social media, and it was a no-brainer. And the other piece of that is that people, you know, it's not hard to watch things escalate if you don't. Actually, I worked on a thing for Etisalat, which is the United Arab Emirates version of Verizon. And it was amazing. Actually, there's a case study for that one. It's really interesting. The viciousness and length and anger and all of that negative sentiment, what they did is they tried it with an outside resource. They hired a company that was an expert at social media and could respond very quickly, and they hired 5 different languages. 5 different people, 5 different languages, responded over a 6-month period, reduced the negatives from like 50% to 5%. Doesn't take, you know, again, negative charts going down to that doesn't take much. You just have to do a pilot study of some sort. You're very welcome.